Shortly after I moved to Chindanduma, there was a change in the administration. A succession of temporary administrators, including the one that had encouraged me to transfer from Bradley. Consequently, the initial zeal and idealism had faded, and the staff collectively become somewhat jaded. Maeda, a former maths inspector, had applied to fill the post in spite of the fact that he had never made any verifiable contribution for independence. He spent several of the critical years trying to get his BSc and then become a teacher. He loudly proclaimed that he knew that the newly liberated nation would need leaders like himself, people who had acquired an education. I am qualified, you see. I shall make Chindanduma a place of academic excellence. This was his great boast as he introduced himself to the staff at their first meeting. Maeda failed to take into account that several of the teachers at the school had been in the thick of the struggle, and also all of the groundsmen were former Zanla soldiers. They would prove to be his toughest critics, and were not entirely convinced by his line of reasoning with regards to his stance on patriotism. Also, there were several expatriate teachers teaching the A-level courses who were unfamiliar territory for most headmasters in the country. He had a lot to prove to everyone, especially as this was his first posting as a headmaster. The students were also an eclectic mix. Amongst my A-level students was a group of young SWAPO refugees who had managed to escape from the fighting in neighboring Southwest Africa, now called Namibia. There were other students in their late 20s who had been in various regiments and killed people not very different from myself during the struggle. Many of the students, like Tendai, had been refugees in Mozambique, and there were also the sons and daughters of families from the cities who were wanting to have their children educated away from the bright lights and the temptations that had sprung up since the change of power. The A-level students wrote well, very well, even the science majors, and it gave me an idea. I approached Maeda and suggested putting a yearbook together. Maeda was very excited that this would be a landmark moment for the school. Yes, yes, he bounced in his seat enthusiastically. If you like, I offered, I could sketch you out a foreword for you to include, and you can rewrite it as you see fit. Maeda thought this was an excellent idea as well. His English was very stiff, and sometimes he was known to create imaginative new words of his own invention, much to the amusement of his African staff. The understanding was reached that every article, joke, and commentary would be reviewed and approved by the headmaster before publication. Once written and approved, the stories were to be submitted to a typist in Harare who would put them onto Gestetner facsimiles, all paid for by a small grant from the Canadian taxpayers, and then run off on a machine provided by the Otto Beneke Foundation in Harare. On my way out of the office, I ran into Hove, the popular coach and all-round Mr. Nice Guy. So, is he in a good mood? Hove ventured. He is, I responded. You have that big smile of yours flashing. What are you up to? I want to go to Kariba at the beginning of the school holidays on the school bus. Would you like to come too? Let me think about that one, but it sounds like a good idea. Good luck with that, I said, and left. Hove had clearly managed to charm Maeda, who was the very first person to hand over his $50, believing that this would provide an excellent morale boost for the staff. Let me handle the issue of the insurance at head office, Maeda announced. I have connections. It will not be a problem. As the event was taking place outside normal school hours, the regular vehicle insurance would not cover any damage or injury claims. It was a reasonable offer, and Hove appreciated the gesture by his boss. The term began to expire. After much prompting from me and several rewrites and a tough editorial meeting in which decisions were made about inclusion, rejection, and final arbitration, the documents for the yearbook were finally handed over to Maida. Approval was slow in coming, but after my daily pestering, Maida finally handed back the handwritten copies of the articles and even signed his own unedited foreword. I managed to get a ride to the city and deposit the manuscript into the hands of a professional typist. Unbeknownst to me, the typist dropped the file and mixed up the documents. While she did not have stories that began with an exciting race and ending it with advice about raising poultry, the order of the stories was a change. It was unfortunate and disrupted the flow of ideas as we had designed them. Regrettably, both time and money prevented the retyping of the project at this point. "This is not the same yearbook as the one you showed me." Maida had glanced at the first page where his contribution was supposed to be and found it instead on page 2. "You must change it. You must change it back. I do not approve this." "It is unfortunate," I agreed, "but the typist has made a mistake. There is not enough time and I have no more money to pay for it to be retyped. Headmaster, I need to be in Harare to run this off tomorrow in order for it to be ready. Remember, sir, that many of the students will be leaving the school at the end of the term and not returning next year." "This is not the same thing as you showed me. I do not accept it. That is final." I was summarily dismissed. Instead of returning to my classes that afternoon, I began walking to Harare. I had only the marking of exams to do, along with report cards, so I called Hezewell, Nyasha, and Wilfred, my editorial committee, and advised them of my plans. They supervised the blocks that I was supposed to cover, and I set. Luckily, I made it to Harare in record time, and the following morning was at the Otto Benneke office and shown how to crank the old machine by Hugh Lewin, the author of Bandit, 7 years in a South African prison. I made a note to invite him to the school sometime soon. The yearbook was over 80 pages long, and I needed 600 copies, all to be hand-cranked. By 4 p.m. the next day, I had 2 very stiff shoulders, 2 blistered palms, and 1 enormous box and 2 smaller ones stuffed full of paper. I was standing on the sidewalk outside the Ministry of Education buildings when, whom should I meet but Comrade Maida. "What are you doing here, Mr. Gaffard?" demanded the headmaster. "Trying to figure out how to get back to school, sir," I brazened it out. "I have the yearbook in these boxes." "Oh, good," mumbled the headmaster. "I shall be driving up at 5 p.m., so I shall pick you up here." With that, he headed off to the ministry to complete his business. I sat on one of the smaller boxes and waited. In the tropics, the sun goes down at around 6 p.m., and very soon it is dark. By then, I concluded that Maida had already intentionally left me behind. He must, I conjectured, have been feeling very pleased with himself at having completed his mission to sabotage the project. However, the gods or the ancestors must have been watching. "Ray, is that you?" I'd been trying to imagine how to carry the 3 boxes across town by myself in the dark and where to put up for the night. Looking up, I recognized Rick Bookfink's VW that had pulled up in front of me. Rick was an instructor at the Harare Polytechnic and had come over with me from Telkwa, British Columbia, Canada. Within minutes, the valuable printed pages were loaded into his car, and I knew that I would be sharing supper with Linda and the kids, as well as having a roof over my head. They were warm, genuine country people, and it helped that I spent a couple of years in nearby Smithers. As my tale unfolded over the dinner table, Rick's beatific smile lit up the room when Linda pointed out that he had no classes the next day. I've never seen Chindanduma. I've heard so much about it from you and Kate. I think I would like to see it. Would you like to be my guide, Ray? Barely an hour before the start of the final staff meeting, a yellow vintage VW rolled up to the classroom block closest to the road. Boxes were unloaded, hurried visit to teachers' houses were made, and three-hole punches were rounded up. 6 three-hole punches were rounded up. Desks were arranged in a vast circle around the extremities of the classroom, and a small army of volunteers began collating copies, 32 of which were given to me to hand out. You can be giving them out to the students as soon as you've finished, but not before. If you start giving them away before that, then you will be swamped and may not complete the task. With that, I marched off to the staff room. "You're late, Mr. Gafford," observed the headmaster as I took my seat. "Sorry about that. I missed my ride last night, sir." I refrained from adding, "as you well know." It was an exciting meeting, running well over the usual 90 minutes that they customarily took, though no one really felt that the time was well spent. When the issue of the Bush insurance was raised, Maeda claimed that he had filled out the forms and would be presenting them to head office the next day. There were gasps of surprise and some anxious looks as this was announced. Then he unloaded another bombshell. "Tonight, I want you to collect every exercise book from the students and place them in the staff room. During the holidays, the department heads will read through them and make sure that the students are doing their work properly." "Yes, Mr. Rose?" Maeda was startled by an unexpected challenge. "With all due respect, Comrade Maeda, the students have already packed them in their trunks because they want to do revision over the holidays. The exam classes needed to be able to prepare." Chris Rose was an expatriate teacher for over 30 years and seen much of the African continent. He was called Prof by everyone, and when he spoke his few well-chosen words, everyone listened. Everyone, that is, except Maeda. "You will collect all the exercise books and check them. I must know that the ministry is not wasting its money on teachers who do not do their work. Do I make myself clear?" Finally, Maeda arrived at the issue of the yearbook, not really out of choice, but simply because it was at the bottom of the agenda. "Mr. Gafford, please give us an update on the position of the yearbook." He assumed that he had managed to kill the project. "I can do better than that, comrade," I announced, pulling the 32 copies out of the box that I had brought in with me. "Here's your copy, sir," and with a flourish presented him with the first edition of the Chindanduma yearbook. I then passed the remaining copies around for each of the teachers present and went on to extend my gratitude to all of those who had contributed in whatever manner to its production. My back was turned to him throughout the exercise, so I never managed to see his face, nor he mine. I was beaming.